Okay, this will be the last lecture on James Steele's River of Earth, and it should be fairly brief. I just want to sum up the end of the novel. We're in the third section, and this section begins, we learned earlier that the Blackjack mines had opened up and Father had gotten some work there, then they closed again. And this is a pattern that's going to repeat itself throughout the rest of this section. The mine opens again, the mine will gradually close again, and this is just indication of the pattern that the family is stuck in economically. But initially, so we have beginning this idea that the Blackjack is closed again, and the family has rented a farm on Flax Patch on Little Angus, and we learned the baby has died during the March freeze, had taken croup and died. And yet, at the same time, the good fortune for the family is that they have a garden that is bountiful. The garden is growing very well here. And in many ways, this is exactly the kind of place that the mother longs to be, longs to live on. There's a great bit of detail about how the garden grows, all the many crops that they get in, and just essentially how well they're doing. The father has found work at a quarry, quarrying rock, and this is just sort of piecemeal work. It's temporary work. He is continuing to wait until and hoping for the mines to open up again. The mother decorates at Easter time an egg tree. And some of you may know what an egg tree is, but essentially all this happens with an egg tree is that a bare tree is decorated with eggshells. And you might still see people do this nowadays. It's kind of a tradition. So, and this is kind of a prize for her. And she has this. She has many things here at this farm that she likes and that are rewarding to her. On 175, we have a word that the father is gonna go find work at Blackjack. The idea that Blackjack coal camp is going to open up again. The mother and the father continue their conflict about this. The mother not wanting to leave the farm. She says, I was reckoning on page 175, I was reckoning we'd stay on here another crap. Mother said the mines is everly opening and closing. And that's the economic situation for the mines, the boom and the bust periods that they continuously go through. I've been told there's no school in Blackjack this fall. The baby is buried here. Never favored bringing up my children in a coal camp. They've got enough meanness in their blood without humoring it. She doesn't want to go there. The father, of course, argues for it. Going to be good times again in Blackjack, father said. I hear they're to pay nigh 50 cents a ton for coal loading, and they're building some new company houses. I got my word in for one. Mother's face was pale in the lamplight. I reckon it's my egg tree I'm hating to leave, she said. I always did want me one. So, again, as she had done earlier, looking for small excuses to delay the inevitable move that they're going to be faced with. 176, the mother says, I'm a mind to stay on here. It's the nighest heaven I've been on this earth. They have a funeral set for the baby, and recall that the funerals would happen not necessarily as soon as someone died, but they would have certain times of the year when a preacher would be available and people would all come, and there would be prayer meetings to accompany the funerals. So they have that for the baby. We continue through this chapter. Sim Moberly has come to preach the funeral for the baby. Now 182, again, the conflict arises about where they're going to live. I'm sorry again moving, Mother said, but I reckon I'm bound to. If we could stop by Lean Neck and see Ma, though, I'd take more satisfaction going. We ought to be moving by Thursday, Father said. No sense dragging our stuff 18 miles out of the way. Come spring, you can go see your Ma. Now we get our roots planted, we keep pulling them up and planting in firm ground, Mother complained. Moving is an abomination. There's a sight of things I hate to leave here. I hate to leave my egg tree I set so much time and patience on. Reckon it's my egg tree holding me. And at the end, the very end of the chapter, we have this sort of a concluding image. 184, we reached Blackjack in middle afternoon. The slag pile towering over the camp burned with an acre of oily flames. A sooty mist hung over the creek bottom. Our house sat close against a bare hill. It was cold and gloomy, smelling sourly of paint, but there were glass windows, and Yulee, Fletch, and I ran into every room to look out. So this depiction of the coal camp, the slag that is thrown aside, that is separated from the coal that is good enough to be sold and shipped and sold and burned. It's continuously sort of burning these slag piles. And then at the very end of this chapter, we have this last kind of concluding motion, this image. We were awake at daybreak, feeling the nakedness of living in a house with many windows. We went on the porch and looked up the rutted road. Men walked the mud with carbide lamps burning on their caps. Mother came out presently, and we went into the yard with her. There was the egg tree. Its roots were buried shallowly in damp earth near the fence corner. Some of the shells were cracked and others had fallen off, exposing brown willow branches. Mother turned and went back into the house. It takes a man person to be a pure fool, she said. So again, as we saw in an earlier chapter, the father has tried to do something that would please the mother, that would make amends for having to force her to move once again. He has dug up the egg tree. He has planted it poorly so that the tree itself is going to die. And he has also broken many of the eggshells that were on it to decorate it. So this is another futile gesture on his part in trying to do something right and to make amends for something. On 186, the next chapter, we begin with a description of the coal camp itself. It was middle afternoon. Yulee and I ran along the road to see the town and to look into the creek beyond. We stole away from Fletch. I had in head seeing the two blind mules Father had told me the foreman kept at his place. We looked at the rows of houses in the valley bottom. 8 houses were high on the hill at the far end of the camp, rooms hung over creek waters, sitting on posts. Our home seat was near the burning slag pile, low in a nest of houses. The camp was alive with the groan of the coal conveyor. It rang through the town like a rusty bell. This is good detail of what the coal camp itself, the miners living essentially right next to the mine in these houses that are all the same. Now, through the rest of this chapter, we're going to be introduced to various characters. Various characters will come onto stage, and they all have something somewhat mythical or miraculous about them to the narrator, to the young boy, 10-year-old boy who is viewing them. We see on 188, a man came walking, his corduroy breeches rustling. He wore 3 shirts, one atop another, and there were 3 collars leafed about his neck. A ball was tossed him, and he bounced it on the ground, skipping like a boy. The children laughed. They grabbed at his coat pockets, reaching into them, pulling. They drew forth bits of string and bright paper and shiny tobacco tags. His pockets were turned wrong side out, and the children scrambled upon the ground for the falling pretties. A baby child toddled between the man's spread legs, screaming with joy. The man hopped on one foot, spun on a heel, and laughed. "He's Jace Hagan," Yulie said, cupping her words into a whisper. "Old Reese Hagan's son. I saw him when we lived in Blackjack last time. He's a man not grown up in his mind." So, this is one of the characters. He doesn't have necessarily a huge role in the plot, but he's one of the characters that come on stage. Now, we have on 189 a depiction of the mind's effect on the natural world. And if you look on very near the bottom of 189, the waters ran yellow, draining acid from the mines, cankering rocks in its bed. The rocks were snuffy brown, eaten and crumbly. There were no fishes swimming, the eddies, nor striders looking at themselves in the water glass. Bare willows leaned over. They grew a golden shadow on the water. So the acid that comes out of the mines themselves are affecting the natural world. Uncle Samp comes again to live with them, and we get more of his character throughout this. He's discussed on 192 somewhat. 50 years old if he's a day, she had said, and never done a day's work. A man of his years ought to be married, keeping his own. A shame he'll put up on his kin when there's work aplenty, not lifting a hand. I always wanted to bring up my chaps honest, never taking a thing unbelonging to them, never taking a grain they don't earn. It's folks forever setting bad examples that turns a child wrong. Harl and Tib show up again. Remember them from the first chapter. And as a favor to the father, the foreman puts them to work as well. So the mine business, the economy is such that there is a boom period and everyone is getting hired. And of course they're going to come and stay with the Baldridges, and the mother is going to be a kind of a hardship that she sees with them. And they will cause problems. Let's go a few pages. I don't want to spend too much time finishing this up. There's discussion just generally about the economics of the mining, and the miners are all frustrated at what they see as just poor management and poor business sense that the owners and the people who are really in charge of the mines have. To the next major occurrence on 209, Harl and Tib, they've been put at the lowest work in the mines, and of course in their natures and their characters, they're always complaining and always feeling like they're not getting their just due. And we learn here that something has happened to Harl and Tib. 209, Mother wakened me in the black of the morning, standing over the bed with the lamp. I saw the fright in her eyes and her trembling hands. The glass chimney shook inside its ring of brass thumbs. She told what had happened to Harl and Tib, the little she knew, all not yet being known. Living or dead, there's no telling. And we learn on the next page, on 210, Harl and Tib's bed hadn't been slept in, and I thought how they had been buried all these hours, deep underside the earth, with nobody knowing whether they still drew breath. A chill fiercer than the cold of the room crept under my shirt. In an earlier scene, they had said they would, when they're grumbling, that they had suggested that they might set off a charge in the mine just to close it down because of their complaining, and the mine actually is starting to falter somewhat, and people are beginning to be laid off. but they've disappeared. There's been an explosion at the mine, and what everybody is thinking, well, that they're buried in the mine, or they've set a charge off and hidden somewhere, and they're just doing this for the meanness that is within them. So all the miners go to try to dig through to where they think that Harl and Tib are. On page 213, Darb Sarles, who is the foreman, he's come and he speaks to the family. Darb Sarles stood in the kitchen floor, filling the space with huge shoulders and the greatness of his body. His head stuck inside the room, for the door was not tall enough. "We've come on that pair of rascals," he said, in words, his words and laughter sudden as a thunderclap. "They blew up the tunnel betwixt them and the opening, closing the thin vein place where I try out my new diggers. They set the charge wrong and trapped themselves proper." "Are they hurt?" Mother asked anxiously. "Not a scratch." "And hollering to get out," Darb said. "Everybody give up and left except Samp and your man. They scrabbled and they dug, and now there's only a foot of rock betwixt. Any minute they'll dig through, I tell you. That Samp is a man mole. If I hadn't been letting men off instead of taking on, I'd hired him on the spot." He glanced at the bean pot, the pies, the pickled plums. His lips slackened with hunger. They're all going to be fat, of course. But they found Harl and Tib, and when they finally get them out, of course, they leave. The next event that happens, Fletch, who is, and we see more of his character. He is very adventurous child, and always looking for things to get into. He manages to get hold of a blasting cap and goes underneath the house, in the crawl space beneath the house, and begins to play with it and strike it with a hammer, and of course it goes off, and the narrator hears this. "Suddenly the earth shook. It was like a rifle gun being fired into the ground at my feet. A cry came from under the house. I fell to my knees, looking beneath. Fletch crawled toward me out of a smoke of dust. He came holding his right hand forward, a gore of blood dripping. 2 fingers hung my skin threads." So he has set off this blasting cap and almost blown off completely 2 of his fingers, which will have to be amputated now. So that's the next major kind of catastrophe. There's always a tragedy, some hardship that is going to befall them. And does so throughout the text. The mother, on page 114, we have this description. "Her body had swollen until she could scarcely walk. She lay awake at night worrying over Grandma. For Uncle Jolly had written a letter saying she was sick. Come for sure, Uncle Jolly had said. Could I go see Ma? Mother kept saying it would be a satisfaction." So the mother is in a sickly way. What's going on with the mother is that she is pregnant again, and there will be narratively this is going to work with something that happens to conclude the novel that we'll get to very shortly. A few pages here. The layoffs of the mine continue for a while. Still, Brack is not being laid off. He's got several children to take care of. But Darb Sarles, the foreman, has to go about and lay off miners, and it seems a burden to him. He describes it as holding an axe over the camp. So, concluding then, now getting toward the very end, Uncle Jolly arrives with a wagon, and in the wagon he has a coffin, and in the coffin, of course, is the grandmother. This is on page 235. I was a span coming, he said. Hain't slept in 3 nights. He began to untie the tarpaulin, though he did not lift it. He untied it all around and then turned upon us, angry because we did not understand. Set 2 chairs in the house to hold the box, he said. We waited, huddled in the yellow light, not moving. He caught the tarpaulin and threw it over the jolt seat. That's his description of the wagon. A coffin box rested on the wagon bed. Mother drew back. She swayed, her knees bent, and she would have fallen had father not caught her shoulder. He led her into the house and sent Yulie after. He sent Yulie after Nezzy Couch. He came back to the wagon, whispering to Uncle Jolly, "It's getting near Alpha's time," meaning that she's getting close to giving birth again. So they set up again. This is a common practice. You know, the deceased being set up for a kind of a wake. And getting towards the end of 241, the father says, "I was born to dig coal," father says. "Somewhere there's a mine working. Fire still burning the world over, and they got to be fed. All the hearthstones in North America ain't gone cold. I've been hearing of a new mine farther than the head of Kentucky River, on yon side Pound Gap. Grundy its name is." His eyes ran over the room, over the grooved timbers of the floor, the ceiling hanging high with no rafters, the bed, the clock, the smoking lamp. It's a far piece to Grundy, 3 days' travel. Can't haul our belongings, we'll sell and give away. We've got to begin over again. We've got to start from scratch. And it's a nomad kind of existence almost. They're traveling to find work. We learn as well, as I think I'd indicated earlier in an earlier lecture, that it was the grandmother, Ma, who has been the one causing Os Coggins so much trouble. Recall Os Coggins had murdered her husband, the grandfather, and everyone had always thought that it was Jolly who was causing Os's problems, but it turns out that it is the mother. On 243, this is discussed. Ma cut Os's fences, burnt his barn, and strode salt over his land. His farm got briny as the salt sea. Father glared at Uncle Jolly. "Hell's bangers," he gasped. He knew it was the truth. Ma told on her dying day, but I'd known a full year once I caught her hiding the wire cutters. And every time I went to Hardintown, she had me packing salt home. I never let on. I was that good tickled. Ma paid Os his due by Juckers. So we learned that. On page 245, the very last page, I just want to note this image that we get and the way that the novel actually concludes. "Hush," father said. He lifted a hand to an ear, catching for a sound through the walls. He had heard something. "Hush." Uncle Jolly stumbled to the porch, smothering his joy. He clumped into the yard. Father stood again at the kitchen door, grasping the knob, waiting. Then he went inside. I heard feet walking. The kitchen fire was being shaken and replenished. The yeasty smell of morning bread hung on a windy draught. I closed my eyes, being near to sleep. I looked at Grandma in the dark of my head, where I could see her living face. "Grandma," I spoke, "where have you gone?" I waked, trembling with cold, and it was morning. The coffin box had been taken away. The chairs sat empty upon the hearth. I ran outside, and there were only wagon tracks to mark where death had come into our house and gone again. They were shriveled and dim under melting frost. I turned suddenly toward the house, listening. A baby was crying in the far room. So the grandmother, has died, but a new life has come into the world. And that speaks to the existential question that is at the center of the book, that is embedded in Sim Moberly's sermon that we have early on. Where are we going on this mighty river of earth, borning, a begetting, a dying? So we have kind of a nice circle that is closed with this book. And at the end, the Baldridges are essentially where they began. They have not progressed necessarily very far. A few miles they have gone, but they are not in a better situation. They are again at the point of needing to strike out and find some means just to survive. Okay, well, I hope that you've enjoyed River of Earth. Look for the test to be open, and I'll have instructions about that. The next thing that I want you to read will be Kinfolks by Gurney Norman, and I'll have some assignments and information up about that very soon.